Hello, folks. Hey, this is Dr. Terry and Tom from the Metaphysical Mysteries podcast, the most interesting part of your day. Today, we have a fantastic guest, the Akashic Record reader extraordinaire, Lisa Barnett. Hi, Lisa. How are you?
Hey, Terry, I am terrific. Thank you. And really excited to have this conversation with you and Tom. So thank you for having me on.
Fantastic. Now, you have done this for a lot of years, and you want to give us a little abbreviated. You could go on. You're like a lot of people. You have a huge resume, but you would give us a little abbreviated where you come from, what you do. If you got any books out there that people need to access, we'll hit it now, and we'll hit it at the end of the podcast so people can grab that. And just for the listeners, we'll have her information on the metaphysicalmysteries.com website, so you can access all of whatever it is Lisa wants to put out to you.
Beautiful. Thank you. So I am the author of 4 books on the Akashic Records. And so there's quite a variety. And again, you can read about each one in detail on my website at akashicknowing.com, and it'll be there. Also posted on the website for you guys. And so very early on in my life, I kind of took a very deep dive, or I was one of those very unusual children who could remember not being in a human body. So it's been my really joy for my whole lifetime to study metaphysics and to be able to do healing work and to start to channel the Akashic Records. So the record keepers asked me all these years ago to help re-anchor this energy on the earth because the vibration had been pulled away during the Dark Ages. So around 1000 AD, the energy was super low on Earth, right? And so during that point, they removed access into the Akashic Records because we misused and abused that energy and that wisdom, that information that we could get hold of. So really, for the last 30, 40 years, we've had access again. That's why it's not as common as many different things. But the record keepers had asked me to help them re-anchor the energy, to write books, and to start a school. And so I have spent really the last 30 years doing all of that with the Akashic Record Keepers. And I have a school which is called Akashic Knowing School of Wisdom, where I teach people a beautiful, simple 5-step wisdom prayer system to easily access your own Akashic records. And we'll talk more about that as we go along, like why that might be useful. But so I have an upcoming workshop towards the end of June. 4 books you can find if you want to dive more into what the heck are the Akashic Records. And you can find more about me at Akashic Knowing. So thank you.
Excellent. So for Joe Sixpack sitting at the end of the bar, doesn't know anything about it. What the heck is Akashic Records? That's a weird name. What is that, Sanskrit?
Yes, it is. So Akasha is a Sanskrit word for ether or sky. Right? So I like to kind of imagine the Akashic Records is an etheric library in the sky. And the very cool thing is that each person has their very own Akashic library because all of us are very ancient, right? Way more ancient than we ever imagined. Hundreds and hundreds of lives here on Earth and thousands in other multidimensional worlds. And so everything you have ever been or done is recorded in your own personal etheric library. And everybody has their own team of librarians that are in service just to you, to help you find the information that you're looking for, to answer those big questions that you have, because we're unique. Right? My big question is not going to be yours, right? So you can learn to access these Akashic records simply with my 5-step wisdom prayer system, which is also written about in 2 of my books. And then you can start to ask all the big questions you've ever had about life. and the whys and the hows and what the heck was I thinking kind of question. And is it in my highest and best interest going forward to, do X, Y, or Z, to marry this person, to start this business, to take this trip, to move, to sell my house? All of this kind of information is actually available to each person through learning to access your own Akashic records, and or I also do Akashic readings, consultations, and healing sessions to help support people who don't want to learn. A lot of us don't have time, but we want some answers anyway. And so I'm here for you.
Fantastic. Well, I'll say the big dog on the modern scene that started the thought process of Akashic Records was Edgar Cayce, in my opinion. I mean, obviously he died in 1945, and for those who don't know him, I mean, there's the whole ARE, Association for Research and Enlightenment, in Virginia Beach. Get a chance to stop by there and look at one of the greatest metaphysical libraries that's physically there. But he always referenced the library as well, and did tons of his readings, 14,000 plus readings. And he basically, since he came from a religious background, I want to at least mention for those of our viewers and listeners that maybe have more of a religious take on a lot of this, he called it the Book of Life, which is referenced in a lot of churchy church stuff, or the God's Book of Remembrance, which then in Sanskrit we're talking about the Akashic records. So, and I think scientifically they've pretty much proven that this actually exists. Would you concur with that?
Yeah, I absolutely would. So, many years ago when I first started accessing the Akashic records, I would talk to my librarians, right? The record keepers who keep my records. And I'd say, like, where are you? What are you? And they would say, we're part of the quantum field. We are part of, like, we're the information arm of source, was kind of how they would say it to me. And so over the last many years, I've been doing much more scientific, reading and looking at these energies of the quantum and the void, and the fact that we truly do have the ability not only to create the life that our heart and soul desires, but there are those infinite possibilities, and this information will always be stored for us in this quantum field.
I get it. Because I come from the law enforcement background, so I got a lot of people that call BS on a lot of stuff. And so the first thing they would ask me if I was having this conversation with them, prove it. That's going to be that next question that comes. I'm talking to somebody, telling them about this, and they go, oh, "That's BS. Prove it." And so, how do you answer something like that?
First, I love to have people have the experience, because how do we prove anything but to experience it ourselves? And so there's kind of a few ways. I often will bring them into this Akashic field with me, where they literally feel the energy change. It moves them from whatever kind of normal human state, of whatever anxiety or overthinking, into a more expanded state of peace. And so I find that most people will feel that shift in energy and feel the peace. And then, of course, I love to lead people through a guided visualization where they will get some information. And often people will be like, wow, that was crazy. I mean, how would they know that I have been holding a grudge against that person? And I feel it shift. I feel the healing. Because again, when you're in source energy, you are in pure divine energy of the all. And source is happy to release your judgments and your traumas and your upset and anger. And so the experience to me is the letting go and just immediately feeling a shift in energy.
Tommy?
It's funny. Terry and I have had this conversation before, but I was fairly young when, for whatever reason, I had this knowing that I could access the Akashic Records. I had no
Mhm.
idea what the heck they were. I only know I could do it. And, when I think of someone sitting there being able to read the records of my life, I said, for that poor person, it must be reading like a comic book to him or her, right? Some of the things we've done over the years. But it's really interesting, the philosophy of it, that we actually have those records that we can access. As I was learning about this, someone once said that you can go into the records and make changes. And that felt a little odd to me. Do you have a take on that by chance?
Yeah, absolutely. So we actually can rewrite many of our records, but we are only able to do that when we have kind of had the soul growth, say, learned that karmic lesson. So we come to this planet, we come to Earth to love, right? To experience this human world and to learn and grow as a soul. And the soul growth comes from what we call karma. So the record keepers always say karma is not a punishment, it is actually your soul's desire to learn. So that may mean that you are born to a challenging family because your soul wants to remember the greater truth of who you actually are as an infinite soul and be able to be the loving compassion even during a challenging time or life or relationship. And so when we are that, right, when we can move past our victimhood, our shame, our blame, our guilt around the traumas in our lives, which I'm not saying it's easy, but
Right.
it's part of the soul growth, it's part of the process. When we have really understood that we are infinite souls and that we are all in this growth process. And so one person is going to offer to be the bad guy sometimes, and we may be offered to be the victim so that we can both learn and grow around that aspect of the karmic pattern. And when it is complete, that record is actually, I would say, upgraded
Okay.
or and so it's kind of rewritten in a lovely way. It's almost like when you get that paperback with the gold star or the big, A plus on it. It shifts the way you see things. It's a lesson you've learned now, right, in your bones, in your cells. And so now we're a different person and we feel that energy upgrade in a sense in the Akash. And you will never have to go back and redo that lesson again.
Yeah, I think people need to realize in America anyway, we think that everybody needs the 2.5 children, a white picket fence, and life is all wonderful to leave it to Beaver stuff is this goal that people have in their head for whatever reason, and many people, not everybody. But when the guy is laying in a ditch as a drug addict and going to jail 3 times a year and things like that, they think that's such a miserable life. Well, it's physically probably not too happy, but going back to what he signed on for to increase and develop his soul, it may be exactly what he needs. And we kind of place a judgment on that here that, that's bad and he should be trying to do the little pink houses for you and me kind of John Cougar Mellencamp world. And that's not necessarily the case, is it?
No, it absolutely is not. And it's been fascinating to me to have read so many people's Akashic record and to have seen and these so many lives of people who have really chosen to, as we were mentioning a little earlier, step into a family of that's filled with abuse. And when we look at the ancestral lineage, it often goes back many, many, many layers of the ancestry. So one parent's been abusing their child and that child grows up and abuses their child and on and on and on, for maybe hundreds or even thousands of years. And what I see is that many people who have come with the purpose to end some of these patterns, because it literally is time. And so I would say there's a lot of souls who hold a lot of light, who are stepping onto the planet right now to say, the buck is going to stop here. Put me in one of those abusive families, and I'm going to end that pattern in that family. I will not abuse my children, or maybe I will not have children. You know, we get to choose what we want. We do have free will, but we make different choices than anyone maybe has made in that ancestral lineage for, you know, hundreds of years. And so we are actually able to be transforming a pattern that's been part of humanity for thousands and thousands of years. And it's time. And I believe that that is part of the way we will transform and be able to create a new earth as we go forward.
So I know that, you know, typically the Akashic Records are viewed as a past record, but with time being linear in this world and non really existent elsewhere, when you access the records, can you see future options or, you know, decisions being made, or is that still very much up to the individual? Because that's a question I've heard before.
Yes, yes. Fascinating, because one of the things that I started to experience after 20 years or more of accessing the Akashic Records, I started to realize that I was moving into the void. Now, often people think of the void as something maybe kind of scary. It's just a big black nothingness, right? But it is the ground of creation, if you can imagine it that way. There is no time or space. It is the all and the nothing. And the way things would show up to me would be, I'm opening a client's records. I'm in this space. It would feel kind of like I was floating in a blackness. And when the client would ask a question, say about what's blocking me from whatever it is, creating a loving relationship.
Okay.
All of a sudden, out of that blackness, I would see, like, they would look like little golden bubbles, right? And they would be lifetimes. And most of them would be in the past. Most of them would be lifetimes that they have had or happening concurrently, but some would definitely be future. And what the record keepers would say is that we often project into the future our desires. And so one of the things I would find like kind of funny and very sweet would be women who would come and they could never find their knight in shining armor, right? From childhood and like all the Disney movies, they had projected this energy into the future as the person they were waiting for. And so when we could unwrite that, we could recall that energy, because everything is energy and it doesn't really belong in one place or another, except for your soul energy belongs in your soul, some of it in your body. But we would reclaim that energy they had projected out about that story. And then we could start to reactivate soul contracts they wrote with actual humans and human bodies at this point that were not cartoon characters. And we could activate and kind of start to realign some of these soul contracts that they had written with other people for that beautiful supportive partnership. So yes, definitely, it's very interesting that we can not only go back and we can heal the trauma in those past lives, because we're in the quantum field and there is no time or space, and we can reclaim or heal the trauma that may be projected into the future. Again, no time space. Pretty phenomenal space to be able to work, right, and help people from, because it's instantaneous in a lot of ways, right? It's very kind of miraculous energetically when we can transform lifetime after lifetime of trauma that is blocking us from stepping more fully into what we wanted to create in this life. So yeah, it is interesting to look at those kind of future lives and what we've projected out, and to reclaim them, or to ask our future selves to guide us on some of these next steps. So very, very cool.
That's awesome.
You
Terry?
know, yeah, a couple of things came to mind there. A lot of times people get into this metaphysical world and they start going to different psychics or mediums or Akashic record, and they're getting a divergence, or a different view of something. Um, Particularly, I notice it in Akashic records, or when people are doing past lives, where they take somebody from today and they say, "Oh, that person was this person back in the day." And then this person was this person back in the day. And then the next person they go to say, "No, no, no, that wasn't that person. It was this person. It was this person." And so what's a consumer to do? Because as law enforcement, consumer protection is, of course, a big deal to us. So what's a consumer to do? Who do they believe and who do they don't believe? How do they decipher or make their way through that sticky wicket, as they say in England?
Yes. Well, I would venture to say that 99%, percent of us are not someone you would know the name of. Right. So it's super, super, super rare. And again, 10,000 readings later, that I have ever met someone. I've met a couple people over that time, maybe who have walked with Jesus, but they were not Jesus, right? That, were part of a maybe mystery school, but they were not Isis or Osiris, right? So I almost never see someone who was very, very famous. And so that's kind of not really what we're looking for in the Akashic Records. To me, it's not who was I? Was I anyone famous? To me, it's like, what did my soul plan before you come into each lifetime? Your soul writes a relatively complex plan. And that plan includes 30 or 50, maybe even 100 soul contracts with other souls who are embodied to do things together, to start a business, to have a family, right? So it could be your spouse and your children and your parents, or sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's some of that, but not all of that. Sometimes we have karmic contracts with people, and sometimes we have supportive contracts with people, right? Supportive ones tend to be much easier, although, nothing's perfect. We're human, right? But so I'm never looking for a bunch of names. To me, that's just kind of silly and usually not the truth if they're like telling you you were some famous queen or whatever it was, right? And again, I would tend to go to trust yourself, learn to access your own Akashic records, and then you learn to actually receive the guidance and the wisdom. And the thing is that I utilize the Akashic records again so I can understand a plan that my soul made. You have many purposes, not one. Most of us have a variety of purposes that change through our lifetime, which we can understand better when we understand our soul plan through the Akashic records. And then many gifts and talents that you wanted to bring with you into this life. So I'm looking more for not who have I been as in a famous name, but what have I done? What gifts and talents have I honed that I can access energetically now? Because again, go back to that quantum void, no time and space. I pull that life out of the void where I was a teacher in an ancient mystery school, and I ask the record keepers to help me reclaim some of that energy, that wisdom that I held in that life. Show me these lives, remind me of a greater truth of who I really am, not just when the record keepers started talking to me. I was a mom with 3 toddlers in the suburbs, and they were like, help us bring the Akashic records back to humanity. And I said, You so have the wrong woman. I am a mother in the suburbs. Like, sorry, wrong girl. And they were like, no, you are one of us. You can hear us. You're the right one. You have to remember, So we start to remember and reclaim energetically many of these gifts and talents we've had when we can start to access that greater wisdom, which to me, again, has nothing to do with like being Queen Mary or some famous, painter.
I got it. So what everybody kind of strives for, at least my students that I've had, is that breakthrough moment where they actually start to hear, feel, get whatever kind of download they're going to get. So how do you get them to the breakthrough moment?
Yeah, so the record keepers gave me what we call a 5-step wisdom prayer system.
Mm-hmm.
And in my online workshop, so I usually teach them over 2 or 3 days. So you have a couple of days of processing, a night in between to kind of, dream process, etc. But because you have an access key, which is in the form of a sacred vibrational prayer, it literally shifts you. I'm going to say 80 to 90% of my students feel that shift immediately. And then we start to practice. So I have them move into the energy. The record keepers have also given me many tools to help us to get grounded and really more fully embodied, bring the soul into the physical form, really activating contracts, being the sovereign, being the queen or the king of your physical body and energy field. So you're actually living your soul's plan, not someone else's, right? Not your spouse's or your mother's or your father's or your grandparents, right? So you're living your soul plan. And we start to do that by using these different energy tools the record keepers have given us. And then we do exercises and we ask some simple questions. And often the simplest process of them all, where we ask ourselves, say, how can I bring maybe more happiness into my life, right? So you would ask yourself that, you'd write down some notes, and most people write down something about meditating more, going to the gym, whatever, eating healthier, right? And then we open the Akashic Records and we ask our record keepers to tell us, how can we bring more happiness or joy into our life? And they get very different answers. And they're like, oh my gosh, I never would have thought about that. The record keepers, and it may be something fun. The record keepers are telling me to go dance again. I haven't danced in 20 years. Oh my gosh, right? And so they start to feel the energy and the truth that is coming through. And this gives them these beautiful kind of breakthroughs and aha moments. And again, I teach this in a 12-hour workshop, so over 2 or 3 days, but true transformation takes time. It takes practice. And so I always suggest to my students to practice at least, 3 to 5 times a week. Just like you don't meditate once and then, you're awake. You may meditate daily for 25 years. But to me, you might work in the records on a regular basis for a few days as you're getting bigger downloads and more clear information and longer answers. And it grows and grows the more time you spend in the Akashic field.
I want to relay a story. I'm going to leave names out of this, but I had a friend who he had a tick that it was when he was walking, it was in his kind of arms. It was tick. And so he ended up, what it was, went to his doctor, ended up going to a neurologist and all kinds of doctors. You just name the subspecialty. He went to tons and tons of these. And he finally ended up with an Akashic record reader and taught him how to access this by himself. And he went into and kept wondering why would when his arms would come up, he'd kind of tick, and it was just an odd thing. And he was very good shape, no issues, but nobody could find out what was going on. So as he relayed the information to me, he goes, I went to the Akashic Records and I found out about several of my lives. And I had been, in this particular life, a slave in the Old South, America, in fact. And he says, ultimately, what I found was the reason I had a tick is because I was a runner. He's still a runner. But I had a tick because I'd run and then they put chains around my ankles. And he goes, then I kept running and they put chains around my wrists and went down to my ankles. So every time I'd raise my hands in as a slave, it would go chink, chink like this. That carried over into his new life now. And so as soon as he realized that, this released, and he's not had an issue since. And the doctors are like, I don't know how you did it, but you knew how he did it. But I wanted to point out, because you're talking about this, but I get a chance to do this stuff too. And so does Tommy, just so the viewers know we're in sync with you, but we're allowing you to do all the talking because you're the expert. But that is a good example of something so weird that, now he has no problem. So I know you see this all the time. Is there a particular incident that comes to mind? This was pretty amazing to watch happen?
Oh my gosh, yes. And I love that you shared that because it sometimes is, and again, it wasn't a famous slave. He didn't do something, but once we can just energetically see, feel, get it, it releases because it is part of this quantum field. So I think that's really important for people to realize. And definitely over the years, neck pains, people who have been hung, different things like that, their neck pain will all of a sudden go away. Sometimes they've lost a limb in a past life and they're always having this pain, and it's almost like an odd kind of like a tick. They're like almost, oh, it's there. That's so weird. Kind of like, why am I checking for my arm, right? And really just accessing the energy. And what we do, what I do as a healer is I want to heal that life where they actually lost the limb. So we kind of put them back together in that lifetime. And then energetically, we bring it forward into this present moment because we're in no time space, we can move everything around. And that makes it really quick and simple to kind of release. And so often these different kinds of physical things that people can't figure out, we can find some unusual story or situation in another lifetime, so it can be so helpful. But often, again, the big blocks and big vows, where I would say I see a lot of people who have, say, money blocks. They come to me, they say, I have a decent job, I make good money, but every time I get a little bit of money in the bank, the car breaks down, the dog has to go to the vet, et cetera, right? What the heck? And so we start to go and look at these past lives, and I find that they've made vows. They've said, say, I remember one gentleman, I saw him riding in a very fancy carriage, like if you imagine the painted French, like rich kind of French guy, and he's robbed, right? The guys on a horseback come and they pull him out and they slit his throat and they steal all his gold and everything. And in that moment where you're kind of bleeding out, it's always kind of interesting. We have just enough time to make a vow to say, I'm never going to be rich again. Like that just killed me, right? And so we write these very, on our deathbed, very powerful vows of poverty, or say, I never want to be rich. I got killed for that. Or maybe I died really alone and lonely because I was very mean with my money. I didn't trust anyone. I had no friends, no family. And so there's lots of interesting aspects that we run into in the Akashic Records in that way, where there's a vow that we vowed never to have money because it's not safe, or we vow, never to take money for our gifts, our spiritual gifts. And so a lot of energy healers have problems charging for their work because they have vows of poverty from other religious lifetimes.
Yeah, I noticed the religious side of it is really, damaging in a way. It can be really damaging if it's misinterpreted and brought on as a belief system that restricts, and that can be problematic. I'm not going to belittle any religious belief. They can have whatever they want. I'm just saying from experience in this field, it tends to come up and be at the higher levels of some of the issues at hand, and so forth. Tommy, I know you got a question, so I'm going to shoot it over to you.
Yeah, this is on track, but a little off track at the same time. So I run into a lot of people whose belief about life really diverges. I have one group that say, life is predestined and I'm just going for the ride. And you have another group that says, I get to make my choices and sculpt my future. And listening to, the purpose of a soul contract and everything, where everything has been agreed upon before coming, it kind of leans a little bit towards the predestined. But that isn't necessarily true. So could you, from your perspective, explain how you view that?
Yes, absolutely. So the reason we write this kind of complex soul plan, and I say, many of us have 50 or more soul contracts, because we want to make sure we get to take care of what we wanted to take care of and do and learn and support and all of that. So we're hedging our bets. I would say that most people, if they wanted to come in and get married, they may have a half a dozen or a dozen soul contracts for significant partnerships. So we do not have one twin flame or one soulmate. We often write a contract to be in a supportive relationship with someone who may be from our soul family. And what a soul family is when you did individuate from source, you didn't individuate totally alone. You individuated with a little group, right? So, it was almost like you were born in a little basket with all the other babies. And that little group goes traveling around through the multiverse together. And so you become each other's family. So we often play again and again and again in different lives and times dimensions with this same soul family group. We're often married to them, or sometimes they get to play the bad guy or the villain or the victim in our scenarios. But we make a lot of options, and that's why I even say we don't have one soul plan, because we do have free will. So we know what we want to work on, but again, because human free will, we come into a body, we have total amnesia. Most of us don't remember what we came to do. And so it's a work in process, and many of us actually work through a majority of our soul plan and come to a place of greater consciousness and awareness and awakeness. And many of us don't. Some of us just totally go down a different rabbit hole. And what I've seen with a lot of light workers over the years is that we may have kind of a big plan, but then we get here and we're kind of awake enough to feel like, where's my family and why am I here? And this world kind of sucks. And those people often will go down, different rabbit holes, whether it's drugs or alcoholism, or some sort of way of escaping the density of this planet. And they may or may not, wake back up again. So there is a huge aspect of the free will, no matter what you wrote in that. So it is not predestined. You have to play the game.
Well, that helps. I think a lot of people with those questions. It's more of a blending of the two from the sounds of it would be the best way to describe it.
Yeah, I've always told people that destiny is, if you're going down the interstate highway and you've got mileposts that you're going down, you're going to get to those mileposts. Now, you can go zigzag all across down through a cornfield, come back, and eventually probably get there. That's your free will. How you get to that milepost is up to you. And then you go on to the next milepost and you can jog all around, and you'll eventually, hopefully, get to all the mileposts that you set out for yourself. But I think the free will is the in-between decisions on how you get to those points. At least that's what I was downloaded with, is something similar to that.
Yeah, I love that. It's a great visual, right? It's So true. When I was young, so I'll just use me as an example because I can. And, so I was awake at 3 years old. At three, I remember looking at my hands and thinking, oh no, like I'm trapped and I'm not happy. And I told my mother, I want to go back. I want to go home, right? And poor mom is like,
Mhm.
You're stuck.
can do, honey. So, all was good. I fell back asleep as we do. I just went, through my life and had a best friend, soul sister, um, who had a brain tumor and she went into a coma at 13. And when I got the information, I got the news that she was in a coma, I thought, oh my gosh, I should be able to heal her. I don't know why I think that, but I know I'm a healer. I know I came to be a healer and I should be able to heal her. And I didn't, and I couldn't, and she passed the next day. But it was kind of the impetus for me to start to study spirituality because it woke me back up to what I remembered at 3. And so I literally was studying, spiritual books, reading some of the early books because this was really the late 60s, early 70s. And Baba Ram Dass wrote Be Here Now was the first book I picked up off of my parents' coffee table. So luckily, well, my soul had a good plan and they gave me not religious and not spiritual parents, but they were very open. So my father had Be Here Now on the coffee table. And so I started reading that. And then the second best friend died. Terrible car accident. And then I was mad that I was really, really angry. And I was mad at God. I said, this is crazy. My 2 soul sisters, right? These are the people I came to be with. What happened? And I went down one of those rabbit holes. It was the 70s and 80s in California, let's just say. It was a little bit of a wild time. And so I went down my own rabbit hole until I started getting yelled at by my guides who were kind of like, this is not who you came to be. Now, I was blessed that I kind of got those messages and thought, ooh, okay, you're right. I'm sure, and I got woken back up again. But I still had to take the impetus to change, directions again, to start to study healing. I became a healer. I studied healing for 8 years. I knew that that was my original calling. And then once I could become a healer, the record keepers could get through. And they started giving me information. And again, in the 80s and 90s, nobody was talking about the Akashic Record except for Edgar Casey, and he had now been long dead, right?
Yeah.
So I didn't even know who was talking to me for 5 years. It took me to like, who is this? And why are they asking me to do all these things, right? So it really is a process. But really the point of that story is that I said to the record keepers one day, I said, I so goofed up. I mean, if I didn't fall down that rabbit hole at 20, I like wasted almost 15 years, and they laugh because they're pure light. And they said, you wouldn't be who you are if you hadn't gone down those roads. You wouldn't have the compassion or the understanding, that you had, because you've been there, you've been down some of those paths. And it was a huge, it was really a huge blessing for me in a way where I realized I was like, oh, thank you. Like I wasn't bad. It got me over my judgment. I wasn't, just often wasting time. That was one of those zigzags that became tremendously useful in my life and in my work.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I know if people are interested, you've got a workshop coming up at the end of June. Was it the 20th, 21st,
Yes,
22nd?
yes, absolutely. I'm on.
Where can they find that if they want to get involved?
Yeah, they will find it on my website, which is just what it says above, akashicknowing, one word.com. And they'll see it right there on the homepage. And it's about 5 hours each day for 3 days in a row. And I teach you my 5-step wisdom prayer system and all of the other tools that the record keepers have given me in order to make it easier for us to clear other people out of our space and align to our soul plan and start to have a conversation with your personal Akashic record keepers. So I'd love to see people there.
That'd be excellent. And I know you're one of the big speakers at Expand, right, in Atlanta.
Yes,
right?
yes.
That's what, June 7th and 8th?
Yes, that's coming up. That'll be a fabulous 2-day event. So, of course, I will be speaking on the Saturday on June 6th about the Akashic Records. And then I do a 3-hour workshop on the Sunday. I'm really bringing people a little deeper into the Akasha and teaching some of the tools that they've given us. And one of the books I've written is called From Questioning to Knowing, 73 Prayers to Transform Your Life. And so I have channeled 73 healing prayers from the Akashic Record Keeper. So I'm sure we'll be using some of those healing prayers. And I know that's one of people's favorite books because they can carry it around. You know, there's prayers like for guilt or for blame or for the unknown, right? A prayer to, to be able to step more fully into the unknown. There's beautiful prayers to help heal Mother Earth. And, 73 prayers are very, very helpful at this time in history. But the Expand event in Atlanta is going to be so fun and so powerful. And there's 5 other amazing speakers who I know everyone will love.
Yeah, I was going to point that out to the listeners. You got to act pretty quick here. I mean, we're in the middle of May and when we're taping today, but this is coming up the first week towards the end of the week in June. So Google that up, Expand, it'll come right up, and you can get involved and get to Atlanta and see all these folks in person and get that firsthand experience. So, Tommy, you got any wrap up questions? Comment?
Yeah, I would encourage everyone to check out your website and get involved and take those classes. I remember when I first started learning how to do this, and it was definitely an eye-opening experience. And it's really cool when you can do it to help someone else on top of that. So I would encourage people to do so. And I want to thank you for sharing your expertise and wisdom with us today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you, Terry. It's been a joy to share this wisdom with you and all of your listeners. Thank you for having me on.
You bet. Well, for everybody here at the Metaphysical Mysteries podcast, we thank you for being here with us today. And we thank Lisa for being on board with us. And there's a lot to learn here. So by all means, get on the computer, start finding this information and make yourself more aware. That's what it's all about. And life will be better all the way around. So we will talk to everybody later. We'll be back with the next exciting guest and look forward to having everybody. We're out. Thanks.